afternoon. I am Vicky McCullum with the Thursday edition of the Our City COVID-19 News Show. We will be updating you on the latest information and resources around the COVID-19 pandemic while unpacking deeper issues as they emerge. We encourage you to get in touch with us as we welcome contributions from movements, healthcare providers and our audience. We would like this program to have a two-way flow of information. As the national lockdown continues into day 56, the current number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in South Africa stands at 18,003 with 8,950 recoveries and 339 deaths. The Western Cape has 11,072 confirmed cases of COVID-19, 5,105 recoveries and 211 deaths. The youngest recorded COVID-19 patient has died. Health Minister Zweli Mkhize says the mother had tested positive for the novel coronavirus and the baby was subsequently positive. Mkhize says the 2-day-old baby was born prematurely and had lung difficulties. He says 8,950 people have recovered from the virus in South Africa. Delft Police Station has been closed after a positive case of COVID-19 was confirmed. We spoke to the SA Police and Allied Workers Union President, Bonga Makuliwe, who has raised concerns about officers returning to work at the station. Makuliwe says the affected officer is part of a Delft SAPS and Railway SAPS joint operation where a roadblock was conducted at Symphony Way.
I think it was Tuesday. There was an operation for a roadblock at Symphony Drive. It was a joint operation between Delft members and members from Railway. Whilst the members were on the roadblock, one of the members was called in by the commander and informed that he tested positive. All right. Now, the operation was called off. The members went back to the station where they were dismissed. So 12 of those members from Railway were put on self-quarantine. Now the problem is, we are asking why was that member on duty whilst waiting for the results? And how many members that were infected by the same member now who tested positive whilst on duty? And how many members of the public? Remember, this person is on the roadblock doing stop and search, checking the driver license of other people. So how many members of public now that might have been contaminated the virus, because of the negligence of SAPS management by not observing the members that went for testing. And in that test, it's worse that there were also other members, who also said, no, we went for testing. Whilst we were at home, we were then instructed to come back to work. There are also OB entries there where the members were instructed to come back to work, otherwise it's going to be absent without official leave. So we find that very strange. And this thing, various stations, it's not only Delft, but we are just seeing that particular instance. There are other stations where a member would find that the member tested positive or went for testing, then continue working, but the result came negative. But now we are saying, no, that is a very huge risk that the management is playing now. Because those members, they cannot be waiting for results at work.
At the same time, a mother from Delft is to open a case of fraud after scammers published photographs of her late daughter, Laminka as a means of soliciting donations. According to the Daily Voice, 31-year-old Roseanne Arendse discovered the photo was being used on Facebook. Arendse's daughter died nearly a year ago from hydrocephalus. This is a condition in the brain where excess fluid leads to the head swelling up. Arendse has since reported the scam to Facebook. The controversial Strandfontein temporary shelter for homeless people has been closed since the end of June. But the leader of the Homeless People Action Committee, Carlos Mesquita, says they have not yet been moved. He has alleged one of its occupants have tested positive for the dreaded virus. Mesquita says they have not been tested or screened since. This is what he has to say.
A number of things have happened. The one thing was that one of the clients in the tent in which we were in, or are in, was tested COVID-19 positive we found out about it on the 13th of this month, which is about a week ago. The person left the facility on the 11th, on Monday the 11th, having been screened, and 3 hours later, upon being tested through one of the drive-through facilities, tested positive. The individual is a worker for one of the NGO groups, Kulisa Streetscapes. We were then told that nobody would leave the site until being tested. This, however, changed, and that afternoon, the city again let people out of the facility, and again the next day, another 30 people let out into the streets of Cape Town without being tested, as had been promised by the city. Then for a whole week, nothing was done, and on Tuesday, on the eve basically of the site having to be closed, we were notified that the committee, of which this individual was a member, as well as a few other individuals that had extraordinary contact with the person that had tested positive, would be moving to another site, which was going to be the Blue Lagoon, I think, beach hotel in Bloemfontein. We then didn't leave on the Tuesday. Yesterday they came to us again and said to us that we had to go to that site for to be quarantined. And then the rest of the residents that were still in Tent 2 had opted for the option that was given by the city, which was to go back to the Kulenburg site where they came from. And yesterday morning we were informed by the City of Cape Town that that Kulenburg site was now a construction site, as they were still not ready to receive anybody, and that people would have the choice of either going into shelters for the duration of the period that Kulenburg was not available, or if they insisted on not going to the shelters for reasons that are, unfortunately, we don't have the time for me to tell you all those reasons, but people are not happy to go to the shelter, which is associated to the service provider, which we had at the campsite, and would rather opt for the street. So this was also being organized yesterday. There were about 140 people going back to the streets, and then the 33 of us that would be going to the quarantine site. We left here at about 5 o'clock, the people that were meant to go to the quarantine site. We arrived at the quarantine site where they told us that they were not aware of us coming there, and they then gave us another site to approach, which was the Melkbos Community Center. The lady there, Mandy, also said to me that she had absolutely no directive to accept us at that site. And after 2 hours at the site, we then were informed by the law enforcement captains that came to address us that we had to be escorted back to Strandfontein.
The Singabalapa community, which has been living outside what used to be the Arcadia building and observatory, were fined by law enforcement officers yesterday. They are accused of violating the city's bylaws, which state that the community cannot cook or make fires while living on the pavement. The community is adamant that they will continue fighting for their right to receive houses.
It's been more than 6 months since the Singabalapa community have been living on the pavement in Observatory, after they were evicted from the Arcadia building in 2019. This community consists of backyarders who were residing in Guguletu, Langa, and other neighboring townships. Due to them not being able to pay rent, they decided to occupy what used to be the Arcadia building, which was later demolished, forcing them to erect tents on the pavement.
All right, izolo elinye bekufike law enforcement. Law enforcement eze kuzosixelela into yoba uzawufika Wednesday, that is nge-20th, azosinika ii-fines. Sabuza ke thina ke i-reason ye-fines yintoni, but it's because thina sibloka abantu kwi-public, sime kwi-public space. Sithi thina simanga kwi-public space, sime kwi-piece yeland ebhilonga kwi-city. And then abantu are free to walk up and down here every day. And then they said, no, they're coming. So they came yesterday morning, at very early hours of the morning. They came to give us these fines, and we refused. Because we said to them, before basinike fines, they suppose explain why and zintoni these fines. Inhlalo yethu sihlala njengomuntu wonke, uyasibona siyasanitizer, uyasibona sinxiba imaski, senza zonke izinto, siyazama uyipractice i-social distance, yonke into siyayenza. But ke ngoku at the end of the day, ifamily ihlala ifamily.
Edwin Angles, who's from the Observatory Civic Association, believes that everyone has the right to decent houses and accommodation, and that the Singabalapa community should receive decent houses.
Well, the Observatory Civic Association has for a long time offered a lot of support to homeless people in Observatory, including the Singabalapa occupation. And we believe very strongly that everybody in South Africa has the right to decent housing and decent accommodation. And therefore we support the fight for the people of Singabalapa to get proper housing. In particular, we feel it's something that the city of Cape Town has very much neglected in terms of providing affordable housing to its citizens. Well, as you know, it's now sub judice. There will be a court hearing on the 3rd of June. And we are hoping that the court will rule that these people, the occupants here, cannot be removed until the city has provided alternative accommodation for them.
Law enforcement officers arrived on Wednesday and informed the Singabalapa community that they will be receiving fines as they have violated the city's bylaws, which state that the community must not cook or make fires while living on the pavement. But when the community refused to sign the bylaw fine, it led to one of their members' arrest.
Indlela abafike ngayo was not in a very decent manner, because I'm sure even if when you come and tell the people ukuthi sizona Victor okanye you can't come in forces like the whole station, like more than 15 vans. Izolo ke bazile bazane letter zabo so sacela uba mabasicacisele uba zingantoni, and mna ndabanjwa based on what one of i-occupants zethu behleli phaa ithi yona ayizosayina apha because abanye abantu abakasayini. So now what I did is I tried to assist him of angabanjwa, ndazama ukumncedisa because kaloku we are here, injury to one is an injury to all, you know. So I've tried ukuthi ndincedise umuntu endihlala naye angabanjwa. So what they did is bathatha bajikela mna ke ngoku that mna I must be held accountable of what I did, because mna what I did is I interfered with the law.
The Singabalapa community is adamant that they will continue fighting for their right to receive decent houses, and that the interim court interdict granted against the city of Cape Town for using bylaws to evict them is victory. For our City News, I'm Zanele Mvana, Observatory.
It's time for an ad break. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back. You're still watching the Our City COVID-19 show on Cape Town TV. The City of Cape Town has given residents and organizations until the 17th of May to submit their objections to proposed amendments to the Streets and Public Places bylaw. The bylaw, which empowers officials to conduct a search and seizure without a warrant in certain circumstances, has been scrutinized by many organizations that questioned the city's motives. The Women's Legal Centre submitted an 18-page document stating their objections and grievances. We spoke to lawyer Christy Blows for more on this.
Welcome, Christy, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
For the purpose of this discussion, what is your current stance on the City of Cape Town's proposed amendments to its public spaces and noise nuisance bylaw?
So maybe it's just kind of important to say that the Women's Legal Centre is an African feminist legal centre. We focus specifically on strategic litigation and public interest human rights around specifically for women. In this context, it's where we have made objections and submissions to the proposed amendments in which the city intends to kind of pass through during this time. So our position has been that we do not support the draft amendments. We have objected to it on the basis that the amendments specifically are going to be unconstitutional, it's irrational, and that it will allow for the unlawful and apartheid-style conduct of law enforcement officials and local government.
Now, we know that the city has allowed until the 17th of May for people to submit their objections and their concerns. And we also know that the Women's Legal Centre has submitted an 18-page document in which they raise concerns. What were the specific concerns that you guys stipulated within the document?
So we had a few points that we kind of highlighted throughout the document. First, it being that we don't think it was appropriate for these amendments to be made and for this month period of comment to be made during the time where everyone is basically focused on surviving, keeping healthy through this coronavirus and the pandemic that the country is facing. Because our laws specifically provide for public consultation, public engagement, and transparency before they are adopted and created. And in this specific time, we don't feel as if people have had a proper time to engage with the proposed amendments and what the effects will be on the residents in the Western Cape. Another reason why we objected is that the proposed amendments actually intend to give law enforcement officials severe and extensive powers in terms, and that will actually affect in military policing of people in the Western Cape. And so we found that these powers will eventually result in grave human rights violations. So, for example, it will allow law enforcement to violate the right to privacy, to dignity, to equality, freedom of movement of a person, to housing, to property, because the amendment specifically allow or intend to allow law enforcement officials to be able to search someone's premises, business, vehicle, and incomes without a warrant necessarily, if they have reasonable grounds to do so. They are able to impound someone's property and at their discretion decide if the property should be disposed of or kept, and along with many other powers. So it was about the public engagement, the lack of engagement. It was about potential violation of human rights. But also, more importantly, it was about how this bylaw has been used since the actual bylaw came into effect in 2007. There's been a severe range of complaints around how law enforcement officials actually use this bylaw to target poor people of color in white affluent areas at the CBD, and how this bylaw has specifically been a measure of military policing intensely on people of color. And for us specifically, it would also be a large component of women who we work with, for example, who find themselves living on the street from time to time, who are homeless. Some of those women are transgender women, lesbian women, who suffer even further discrimination based on their sexual orientation and gender identity at the hands of law enforcement officials through these bylaws. And specifically for sex workers, women who choose to conduct sex work and who find themselves on the street because of the current stigma and discrimination around sex work still being criminalized in South Africa. And so these women fall in a particular vulnerable group of persons who are targeted by this bylaw. So it's on behalf of these women who we made the submissions on.
Yeah, and like you rightfully mentioned, it result in a abuse of power from law enforcement side. And speaking of that, which rights or what does this mean for the rights of individuals that law enforcement will now have the right to enter any premises and search without a warrant? Which rights will this infringe on from a legal perspective?
So legally, it's problematic in the sense that we already have the Criminal Procedure Act, which specifically provides for investigative powers by the South African Police Services. So it sets out the rules and regulations in which our police officials are able to enter your premises, search your premises, seize articles that belong to people. And what's important is that because the South African Police Services and their behavior is regulated in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, there's also been a lot of case law around balancing the rights of people and the law and training for police officials on how to conduct this, right? Even though we know that it is still problematic in certain areas and there is still police conduct that needs to be monitored and that is not done according to the, but there's kind of an oversight and judicial framework for police and the way that they conduct themselves. And specifically in the Criminal Procedure Act, it provides for the manner in which police officials do so and how they should get a warrant, when the necessary means are to get a warrant, what the necessary means are to act without a warrant. Now, if we're going to shift that to law enforcement, it's giving law enforcement extensive powers that are not really provided for within the bylaw. Because the bylaw, you need to look at the purpose of law, the object of the law itself. And in terms of the bylaw, it's to kind of provide for all the conduct in the Western Cape, so that there's proper behavior within the streets with noises and disorderly conduct. If you match the human rights that will be violated as per the amendments that they would want to introduce, there's no balance in that. For example, to say that a law enforcement official is able to search your premise, your business, your property on the reasonable ground that they think that they're allowed to do so, that is a complete violation of the right to privacy. And it's also nonsensical because my premise would be my home, and then what would justify for a law enforcement official? Would it mean that if someone is having a party or the music is loud, that they're just able to come into someone's home? They're able to then search your premises because they have reasonable grounds to suspect. And what are those reasonable grounds? So that's a main grapple that we have and that we also outlined in our submissions in the nonsensical manner in which these amendments intend to take place, because how do you then balance the intention of the bylaw, which is orderly conduct of the public, versus a violation of the right to human dignity or the right to privacy, which is contained in the Constitution? And a few more human rights that we've outlined in our submission is, for example, the right to freedom and security of the person, the right to freedom of movement and residence. And another big thing, especially in relation to homeless persons, that we find is going to be problematic is that for someone who is living on the street, their shelter and their home might conduct of cardboard, plastic structures that they have found to erect safety for themselves. If law enforcement is allowed to just impound and seize your property, they'll be able to effectively evict someone. And we know that evicting someone without a court order is unlawful. But then they'll be able to effectively evict a homeless person from their structure and from their home without the necessary court order to do so and without the necessary oversight. Because part of the amendments provide that things and possessions that they impound, if they feel, for example, that it's disposable, they're able to dispose of it for non-perishables. Those might be the belongings of that homeless person, but the city official now have the authority to dispose of it because to them it's a perishable or it's not important. And we know that severe rights that will be affected by homeless people, for example, and it will create so much further vulnerability in relation to safety and in relation to health. Because for someone who lives on the street, within that shelter that may be then removed by the law enforcement official, they will have immediate and very important personal documents, such as an ID document, such as a birth certificate, such as medication for people who have TB or HIV. And these are the personal belongings that will be able to be removed, confiscated without oversight. And so it's a knock-on of grave violations that will be taking effect, basically.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, Chris, and thank you for joining us.
The continued shutdown of the construction sector could cost the Western Cape over 100,000 jobs and a loss of nearly 15 billion rand. The province's Economic Opportunities MEC, David Mania, and the Cooperative Governance Minister, Nkosazana Dlamini, have asked for the industry to be allowed to continue operations. Mania says the full resumption of the sector can save hundreds of thousands of jobs in the province and is a vital component of the South African economy. Western Cape Premier Alan Winde has called for the province to go down to level 3 lockdown. Winde says the province has a targeted hotspot plan to curb the coronavirus from spreading more. Helga Jansen-Doberger speaks to the Premier.
Premier Winde, good morning to you. Lockdown level 4, day 20. Certainly no stranger to Cape Town TV, so thank you for your time. And as we've been talking, uncharted waters for government and for civil society.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, Premier, in March, President Ramaphosa announced a hard lockdown. Your government was in full support of the strategy. Is this still the position?
Yes, absolutely. We supported that strategy. It enabled us to do two things. One is it really kind of got everybody, the whole of the country behind the fight of this pandemic. It got us all to understand the impact and the seriousness of it, but also at the same time, the lockdown gives you the opportunity to at least get your health response in place, because that's the most important thing we've seen around the world, where health systems can't cope, and those are first world health systems, and they can't cope. So we really have to put in an extra effort, and that's the extra hospitals in the CTRCC. We've got one in Khayelitsha, we've got one on the R300, we've got another one out in the Winelands. So getting PPE and all these things that get your health response ready. But of course, the longer you stay in lockdown, the more you not only have a COVID crisis, you start to develop a humanitarian crisis on the other side, a jobless environment, and you put real pressure on the system. And of course, between 1.2 and 1.8 million people who aren't able to earn a living, who aren't able to get UIF or a social grant, and now suddenly you're really putting pressure on the system. So you've got to try and find the balance between the two, your health preparedness and your ability for people to earn a living, to put food on the table, to have electricity, etc. And this is the tough part. This is the difficult part that we're busy with at the moment. And now, as the country looks at different ways of enabling the economy, while bearing in mind we've got to keep the spread from getting out of control, we've got to make sure that we get the balance right. And that's the difficult part. So the next stage is not going to be easy for South Africa or for the province.
Absolutely, Premier. The next stage, the next phase, we are currently at national level 4, but your government is beginning to call on the Western Cape to slowly move to level 3, despite our cumulative figures in the province making up 60% of the national cases. I mean, I'm not quite sure what the 24-hour cycle has been, but we have consistently for the last 2 weeks at least been at the high point of the cases in the country. So can you maybe explain to people watching what your rationale is for wanting to move the Western Cape to lockdown level 3?
So number one, we know where our curve is. We know how it's going to rise. Well, as best as our specialists and advisors, basing it on international experience and our own environment and ecosystem. We've got a trajectory. We know we double our cases every 8 days, so we're over the 10,000 mark now. In 8 days' time, we'll be over the 20,000 mark. And we've got our health preparedness right. So I believe that we should start opening up the economy a little bit more. because it doesn't help having now people die of malnutrition. It puts extra stress on the COVID environment. People are locked down for too long. That starts impacting on people's health, and we need to find that balance. I believe we've got our response right. I also believe from the specialists that we're probably 2 weeks ahead of the rest of the country. There's no province that's not going to get COVID or that it's not going to peak. Every one of us, there's no reason to believe that one is different to the other. We might have some different comorbidities in our society. We might be more densely populated in, let's say, the city, like in the center of Gauteng, KZN and the Eastern Cape. So we should have similar growth of the virus and similar peaks. We also might be a little bit ahead, so I think the country can learn lots of lessons. We work very closely with the National Department of Health. And so I believe that it also is going to create absolute chaos, is if different towns go to different levels, and then, so now you'll say to, let's say the Karoo, well, you can go down to level 3 at level 2, and in 2 weeks' time, we're going to say, but hang on a second, now you must go back to 4, and it's just going to create chaos. I think the model that we've put on the table about zooming in to those areas just to try and cool the spread, that's what's going to be important now over the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Premier, let's just talk the public health strategy. There are some public health experts, particularly those that are working in the community action networks, who are saying maybe it's time to move on from track and tracing to a more universal precaution strategy, which puts the elderly and the vulnerable at the forefront. What is your position on moving on from track and tracing?
So you'll see today at our Digicon, Dr. Keith Klutti and the Department of Health are actually now talking about that as well within the department, saying that we've got to now try a different focus, which is more aggressively protecting the more vulnerable. And so just as we've been doing with tracking and tracing and quarantine, we've now got to take that and make sure that we're in those hotspots focusing on our vulnerable. And the vulnerable are, number one, the elderly, but number two, people with comorbidities, and we've got many people with comorbidities, and we've got to protect them. Those are people with diabetes or with TB or with hypertension or heart disease. Any of those comorbidities, we've got to make sure that we're protecting them.
Premier, let's move on to safety and security. And I know that in terms of law enforcement, it is not a provincial government competency, but there have been calls from some communities to have neighborhood watchers and CPFs lend greater support to SAPs. Because crime, of course, is not going to stop just because we have COVID-19. What is your position?
So, I mean, I must say that during the level 5 lockdown, I was very happy to see that our murder rate came down. I'm sorry to see that in certain areas it's starting to go up again. But as you say, crime doesn't stop. The illegal space and the criminality, I think, sometimes thrives on our police in other areas busy with roadblocks and not necessarily fighting crime. I actually have a urgent meeting with the minister, with the Premier in the Eastern Cape, the Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, as well as our MECs from both provinces, talking about movement, and that's about policing of people. I think our police are under severe pressure because many of our police are also getting infected with COVID-19, and then they have to go into quarantine, etc., and it starts to put pressure on the system. So I believe, and I have advocated all along, that our neighborhood watchers should be involved in helping us to fight this spread in actual. And I think there are many parts of our province still that people don't really adhere to the rules with masks and social distancing. And police can't do it alone. There's 20,000 police officers. Maybe there's 2,500 law enforcement officers. There's another 2,000 military. Quite frankly, for 7 million people, we can't police our way through this thing. We need civil society to take responsibility. And then within that civil society, bridging the gap between civil society and our police and law enforcement, that is the role of CPFs and neighborhood watchers, and we really need them to be playing a stronger role. We have been advocating it. I will do it again to Minister Bheki Cele, And I think we are starting to see some loopholes and areas where that is able to become practice.
Premier Wendy, thank you so much for your time and thank you for sharing the information with us. I'm sure that we will be engaging with you as we go into the next few months. And to you and your staff and your families, we wish you a safe period ahead. Thank you so much.
A teenage boy has been arrested for selling illegal cigarettes. The 16-year-old and his 24-year-old companion were bussed during an undercover operation by Grassy Park police. The sale of tobacco products is banned under lockdown. As a result, there has been a significant rise in the black market, where normally cheap brands of cigarettes can fetch over 200 rand a box. According to the Grassy Park Community Policing Forum spokesperson, Philip Bam, police have confiscated illegal cigarettes several times. He says this indicates the trade continues unabated. Global countries such as France and New Zealand have reopened schools, and the United Kingdom, like South Africa, will be reopening schools on the 1st of June. Yesterday, at the World Health Organization daily media briefing, during the Q&A, infectious disease epidemiologist Maria van Kerkhove touched a bit on the issues of schools reopening during this pandemic.
Your one question has several components, very important components in terms of our understanding about the infection in people in different age groups as well as transmission. We are looking at all of these factors. The first one is about the infection by age group. So of the reported cases that we have, to date, children seem to be less affected in terms of the number of cases that are reported by country. We have a database that we are keeping here at the global level from reports from countries. It doesn't contain all of the 4.5 million cases plus that have been recorded to date, but it does contain a large number of those. And among the cases that are reported, and if you look at individual country reports, children represent around 3% up to 5% in some countries of the total reported cases. Second part of that question is looking at whether or not they can transmit. There are a number of studies right now, and I'm looking at a slide set that I have, because one of the important areas we want to understand is how are people infectious and when are people infectious, and how do we measure that in individuals. And what we know from the studies is that people can be infectious. Mild patients can be infectious for up to 9 days. People who are hospitalized can be infectious for longer, which is why it's absolutely critical that cases are isolated. And this is why, as part of this strategy, cases need to be isolated and contacts need to be followed and quarantined. Children are susceptible, just as adults are, and they can transmit as well. From some of the studies that we know from the household transmission studies, children seem to be infected from their parents, from adults that are living in that household. But it doesn't mean that it can't happen the other way around. The question around schools being opened, a number of countries across the globe have closed schools as part of their measures to put in place, but not all countries did that. And so as some countries in Europe right now are lifting some of their so-called lockdown measures, these public health and social measures, some of them are considering opening their schools or have opened their schools. And just as we mentioned around the tourism industry, it's important in the areas where you're considering opening schools to look at the context, look at the transmission intensity in that area. Is transmission controlled? Are there decreasing numbers of cases? And as schools are opened, can they be opened in a safe way in which physical distancing can be maintained? Perhaps there may be a way in which some children can go back half of the classroom or the other classroom. There's a lot of considerations that need to be put in place. But we do need to watch very carefully in situations where the lockdowns are being lifted. We need to look at all age groups, including children, and ensure that we have systems in place. The surveillance is in place so that we could detect cases quickly.
Coming up, Stephanie Pete will look at what is happening on social media.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Our City COVID-19 show. I'm Stephanie Pitt. We posted a question on our Facebook page on what our viewers thought of schools reopening. Let's have a look at what they had to say. Allow grades 7 and 12 to complete the school year. They can be divided up into smaller groups as there will be more teachers. Lavona Mary Campbell said, my 6-year-old son has a very low immune system. He almost gets sick 10 times a year with bronchitis according to doctors. So for me, suffering from asthma, my mother with diabetes and other existing diseases, I will not be sending my son to school. Trishka Low, however, said, I want my child to go back to school. She needs her education. Children aren't so badly affected, so it's not that worrisome. She, however, went on to say that elderly people should stay in quarantine. Hashtag Kwazilogy Kozat said, Wuhan province is not ready and public awareness may assist people to behave. Masuna Jacobs Williams said she's not sending her child to school as masjids are closed and churches are closed. Why should schools then be reopened? It's like sending your child to his or her death. Last but not least, Lemise Darman said the MEC should answer the questions of will the protocol be followed if children test positive for COVID and what happens thereafter. We had quite an overwhelming response on our Facebook page, with some parents feeling that children should return to school, while others adamantly opposed the move. These responses followed the announcement made by Basic Minister of Education Angie Motshekga that schools will reopen on the 1st of June in a phased-in approach, starting with grades 7 to 12. Thank you for sharing your comments with us. And now for social media. Share your thoughts with us on Facebook via Our City CT and on Twitter at Our City CT. These are the popular hashtags on Twitter today. Hashtag Onida Cooper must fall. And then there were two. Another Miss South African hopeful has been outed for making offensive comments on Twitter. Hashtag Bianca has fallen. Bianca Skumbi has withdrawn her entry into the Miss South Africa 2020 competition after racist tweets she posted as a teenager came to light. After the ad break, Vicky McCullum will be sharing important information on resources and places of safety that you can access during this period. Stay with us.
Welcome back. You're still tuned to Our City, the COVID show with me, Vicky McCullum. For your latest news around the COVID-19 pandemic and to see what other Cape Townians are doing to keep safe, tune in to Cape Town TV Daily. These are some organizations helping communities stay safe during this period. That's all we have for you today, but if you have something to say, we want to hear from you. Send your comments, news and questions to us via Facebook at Our City CT, on Twitter at Our City CT, or get in touch with us via email on ourcity@capetowntv.org. You can also call us on 021 448 0448. From me, Vicky McCullum, and the Our City News crew, have a good week. Goodbye.